Dr. Vijayaratna has obtained her PhD in biotechnology from Tokyo Institute of Technology, Japan in 2020, and also the MSc from the same institute and same uh, area. And she has obtained her BSc in, in chemistry honors from the University of Colombo. And Dr. Jayaratna is, sorry, Dr. Vijayaratna is a senior lecturer at the University of Colombo, Department of Chemistry. Now, she has supervised a lot of PhD and MPhil students during her career and published many journal publications. And she has won many awards like NSF Research Award, Sustrets Award, and she has patents. And also she has worked as a visiting lecturer and the coordinator of the ordinator in different programs in the university. So Dr. Dilrukshi Vijayaratna, may I invite you to deliver your presidential address. She is the president of Section E2 of the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science in 2020.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon. I am privileged to deliver my presidential address on behalf of Section A2, Chemical Sciences of SLAS. The title of my presentation is Biosensors Linking Nature with Technology. In my address, I wish to share some of the information gathered about biosensors and the attempts of my research group on biosensor construction. I see this scenery as a beautiful scenery. Why all this happen? So I could visualize this because the light bouncing off is captured by my eyes. So the data that gets picked up by eyes and converted to electrochemical signals through the process of sensation. These signals move through the visual cortex of the brain for pattern recognition that we known as perception. All this happens because of our sensory organs. Nature has evolved the most sophisticated sensor systems known to us. It is amazing how nature has created sensory organs with unrivaled sensitivities and specificities. In these sensory organs, such as the nose, eyes, ears, skin, sensor morphologies like shape, texture, and arrangement of sensory elements play a unique role in the performance of a sensory system. So understanding sensor morphologies and mechanisms of sensing is not only fascinating, but has played a significant role in development of the sensor technology. This child smells the flower. What is happening here? It is a series of chemical reactions. The chemistry that goes on here is not as simple as smelling this flower or seeing the color of the flower. Thousands of well coordinated reactions are taking place. The chemistry behind this is really fascinating. But if this series of reactions do not properly coordinate in living organisms, let's say in the case of humans, it is a disease condition. With respect to diseases, we believe that prevention is better than cure. Hence, early detection of errors in biological mechanisms in humans is more appropriate and desirable than waiting until the disease symptoms appear. Monitoring should therefore be carried out to prevent as well as to assess the effectiveness of the treatment. The functioning of metabolic pathways in humans as well as other organisms is now well understood. The intermediate or final products can be used to monitor these pathways. In the event of certain diseases, measurement of body temperature, blood glucose levels, proteins in urine, etc., are part of the routine diagnosis. Thus, accurate diagnosis is essential for proper disease management. Today, sensor technology has been improved by mimicking nature, and sensors have taken up the data capturing function of our sensory organs. Machines take over the function of the biological sensation in capturing signals, while synthetic models that over the signal transformation of the biological perception by interpreting these signals. So let's look at what a sensor is. Sensor is a device that detects and responds to some type of input from the physical environment. The specific input could be heat, light, motion, pressure, or any one of the other environmental phenomena. The output is generally a signal that is converted to a human readable display at the sensor location or transmitted electronically over a network for reading or further processing. The mercury-based glass thermometer is a well-known example of the many different types of sensors. In the mercury-based glass thermometer, the input is temperature. The liquid contracts and expands in response to temperature, and levels will be higher or lower in the marked gauge, which is human readable. Biological phenomena or molecules have been in use as sensors from olden days. Old coal miners kept canaries in cages with them when they worked in mines. These canaries die if the amount of toxic gases like methane exceeds the normal level, thereby serving the miner to get out of the coals, out of the mines if at undesirable situations. Beyond this simple example, if we consider the natural chemical reactions happening in our body, which are known as metabolic reactions, we can monitor the reactions, whether it is happening as it should, using the chemistry in the reaction. The chemistry of metabolic reactions has been made use of in analysis. These reactions are mediated by enzymes, which are considered as excellent analytical reagents because they are considered as specific, sensitive, and efficient molecules. They are often used to determine the concentration of their substrates by means of initial reaction rates. The rates of reactions under specific conditions can be determined by using enzyme kinetics and the basic Michaelis-Menten equation. The rates of reactions are commonly determined by measurement of the difference in absorbance between reactants and the products. An example for this is the galactose dehydrogenase assay for galactose, which involves the oxidation of galactose by the redox enzyme NAD+. Galactose is a hexose essential for production of energy, which is necessary for glycosylation of exogenous and endogenous proteins. The inability to metabolize galactose results in galactosemia. Galactosemia is an autosomal recessive disorder that affects newborns who are asymptomatic and healthy, then develop serious morbidity and mortality upon consuming milk. Breast milk contains lactose, which would yield galactose. Early detection of galactosemia is not only curative but helpful in management of the disease by preventing deaths, mental retardation, liver failure, and renal tubular acidosis via restricting galactose intake. Hence, newborn screening for galactosemia prevents potential lifelong suffering. In some countries like Australia and United Kingdom, national programs are already in place to screen newborns for galactosemia. Galactose can be measured by enzymatically by monitoring the hydrolysis of galactose spectrophotometrically in the presence of NAD. At 360 nanometers, the absorbance of NAD plus is 0, while NADH shows an absorbance of 0.62 at 0.1 millimolar concentration. These assays are commonly used in analytical laboratories and are indeed excellent where a wide variety of analyses need to be undertaken to a relatively small number of samples. The drawbacks in this type of analysis becomes apparent when many assays need to be performed. They are costly, time-consuming, labor-intensive, and need skilled personnel and properly equipped analytical laboratories for an accurate and reproducible operations. For routine or on-site operations, these disadvantages must be overcome. This is achieved by the development of biosensors. The UPAC definition for a biosensor is shown in the box, and a simpler way to put it across would be a biosensor as a tool for the analysis of biomaterials sample to gain an understanding of their biocomposition, structure, and function by converting a biological response into a measurable response. The first true biosensor was developed by Professor Leland C. Clark in 1956 for oxygen detection. He is known as the father of biosensor, and his invention of the oxygen electrode bears his name, Clark electrode, which was used to measure blood oxygen levels. In 1975, Clark's idea became a commercial reality with the development of a glucose biosensor, which works by keeping track of the number of electrons that pass through glucose oxidase. The basic concept of the glucose biosensor is based on the oxidation of glucose oxidase. In order to work as catalyst, here glucose oxidase requires redox cofactor, which works as an initial electron receptor. The cofactor is regenerated by reacting with oxygen, leading to the production of hydrogen peroxide. In the first generation glucose biosensors, amount of glucose is determined by measuring the amount of hydrogen peroxide produced by the enzymatic reaction. The second generation sensors use a diffusible or immobilized mediator to transfer the electrons. While in the third generation sensor, electron transfer is directly measured and has been used in wearables today, and it is a non-invasive method. The beauty of biosensor technology is that it does not only exploit the molecular recognition event, but brings together researchers from different areas of science and engineering. Interdisciplinary nature allows integration of ideas of professionals in different fields, leading to out-of-the-box thinking and creating something substantial. And simple example is the pregnancy test, where researchers from biology highlighted the biological aspects, while engineers worked on the electronics of the system for the readout. The final outcome is research from the laboratory is being transferred to consumers worldwide because of management of professionals. Here in human chorionic gonadotrophin hormone is used in the pregnancy testing, which is known as HCG. HCG is produced by the placental cells and provides nourishment to the growing embryo. With the pregnancy test strips, the data is analyzed by the user and interpreted by the user. Going beyond this, today, the data interpretation is also done with the involvement of technology. In the other example, shown on the right-hand side top, in the infectious disease monitoring, the microprocessor is doing the interpretation for the user. Biosensors are not only used in healthcare, but they also have a very wide range of applications, such as environment monitoring, food safety, agriculture, and drug discovery. My research, which I will be talking about shortly, focuses on environment monitoring, particularly heavy metals and plastics. In food and medical applications, disposable sensing platforms are required. Hence, these are considered as single-shot analysis. On the other hand, applications such as pollution monitoring requires a biosensor to function from a few hours to several days. Such biosensors are termed long-term monitoring analysis tools. Whether it is long-term monitoring or single-shot analysis, biosensors consist of three basic concepts: bioreceptor, to detect the biomolecule and generate the stimulus; a transducer, to convert the stimulus to the output signal; and signal processing system to process the output and present it in appropriate form. Among these, bioreceptors are the key tools in biosensor technology because they are biological molecular species that bind with the analyte to analyte to produce a signal measurement by the transducer. Biosensors are categorized based on their transducing element and the bioreceptor element. Depending on the type of the bioreceptors, again they can be categorized as antigen antibody, whole cells, DNA or the nucleic acids, enzymes, and the biomimetic substances. So biomimetic those are the molecules which have been synthetically synthesized. Commonly used biosensors are two types: catalytic type and affinity type. Catalytic type are enzymes, organelles, whole cells, bacteria, and tissues. Affinity type are antibodies, receptors, and nucleic acids. Our research contributions are towards exploring efficient bioreceptors and using them in biosensor construction. So here we use the metabolism of the organisms. So the metabolic processes involved in metal tolerant mechanisms need to be studied, and regulatory molecules need to be isolated in the event of being used in heavy metal monitoring. As mentioned before, one of the uses of biosensors is in environment monitoring. With the rise of industrialization and urbanization, the environment is being heavily contaminated. Environment pollution has adverse impact on health. At the beginning of the year 2020, the General President declared the theme of the year as Science for Quality Life. If the environment is free from xenobiotics and pollutants, health hazards will be less and the quality of life will be improved. Heavy metals, plastics, fertilizers, pesticides, and organic solvents are some of the environment pollutants. Removal and detoxification are some of the approaches that we can be used to reduce these contaminants. We can use chemical, physical, or biological methods for these processes. However, biological approach or bioremediation is an ideal approach to bring down their levels to or to convert these harmful substances into non-toxic forms. In our research, we investigated the potential of isolated microorganisms to degrade heavy metals and plastics. If we consider heavy metal pollution in Sri Lanka, the National Environment Act 47 of Central Environmental Authority specifies the permissible levels of heavy metals in industrial effluent discharge. Section E2 collaborated with CEA to find a low-cost method to mitigate heavy metals in industrial waste. Actually, this was one of the projects initiated by the General President at ministry level in order to bridge the gap between the research findings and useful applications to improve the quality of life. I am happy to say that the levels of lead, copper, zinc, and iron in the industrial effluents from the two industries provided by the Central Environmental Authority were below the recommended levels. Chemicals and physical methods, decontaminations have been used, but there are several drawbacks such as high cost and inability to remediate ppm levels of contaminants. Hence, use of living organisms or biomolecular based techniques in monitoring, detection, as well as remediation is considered as an ideal solution, because regulatory mechanisms are already in place in organisms to limit or prevent accumulation of metals in cells. These are the metal tolerant pathways reported in bacteria. They include bioaccumulation, bioassimilation, precipitation, biotransformation, so on. These naturally existing mechanisms can be improved for them to be used in cleaning up of the environment as well as monitoring of heavy metals. I am thankful to the National Foundation for providing financial assistance in the year 2012 for the project on elucidation of molecular mechanisms involved in heavy metal removal in bacteria. The outcome of this project are the main tools that are utilized in biosensor construction by my research group. In 2017, we obtained financial assistance from the University of Colombo for the project construction of a bacterium for biomonitoring. So here metalloenzymes and metalloproteins are involved in these mechanisms, and ATPases are one of the enzymes involved in biotransformation. So the findings of our projects are summarized here. We isolated bacteria with the potential for metal bioremediation. I am presenting only the behavior of a single isolate. Its bioremediation potential was significant. It could remove more than 80% of copper, cadmium, lead, and iron from the effluent. The unexpected observation of brown coloration of the medium was interesting and was due to the formation of biofilm by the bacterium used. SCMEDS analysis indicated that the brown substance contained iron. After determining the genetic determinants, possible mechanisms were proposed as shown here. The figure on the right hand shows the identity of the bacterial isolates and the isolated genes. The figure on the left is the metal accumulation process through the everted membrane vesicle formation. These findings have been communicated in several scientific platforms, such as scientific journals and conferences. The components involved in these mechanisms can be used in monitoring or sensing process by integrating a signaling or receptor component with a biological macromolecule. And it allows biomolecule to directly transduce the molecular recognition event into a detectable signal. Some of the biosensors used in environment monitoring are shown here. Whole-cell biosensors that are being used in environment monitoring rely on gene expression. The principle we use here is protein synthesis, that is meant by gene expression. So here, in other words, analysis of the gene expression of the regulatory protein. To detect its synthesis, a reporter gene is used. Reporter gene expression serves as the detection signal in biosensor construction. Sorry, it's not playing. Why it's not playing? Okay, I will go ahead. Okay, so here what we did was we formed a transcriptional fusion between the promoter and the reporter gene. So when we consider these reporters, ideal reporters are the molecules which can produce auto-detection signals without the addition of exogenous substances like bioluminescence or fluorescence. Bacterial luciferase and green fluorescence protein, GFP, of Hydrozoan jellyfish are such reporter systems that have been used extensively in environment monitoring biosensors. So here you can see bacteria glowing when GFP protein is produced. Here the regulatory protein and the GFP protein transcription fusion has been done. So biosensors have been under development for the last 70 years, and fundamental research findings applies in all these advanced applications. And research in the field can still make tremendous contributions. Even though some of the regulatory molecules are known, there is still great need to identify more such molecules. We attempted to identify and isolate regulatory molecules from our isolates to be used in environment monitoring biosensor construction. One such molecule is metallothionein. Metallothionein is involved in sequestration of heavy metals such as copper, cadmium, zinc, and lead. After confirming the identity and the nature of the protein based on the nucleotide sequence and deduced amino acid sequence, metallothionein was successfully expressed in Escherichia coli, as shown in the figure on the right-hand side. As the metalloproteins has high affinity for heavy metals, we focused on using these proteins for preparation of two types of biosensors: an ion selective electrode as an electrochemical biosensor, and a bacterial cell as a whole cell biosensor. So these are the sketches of the biochemical biosensors, electrochemical biosensors. So the metallothionein will be used as an ionophore in a paper base, and in the other one in a liquid membrane. And though some of the regulatory proteins are already in use as bioreceptors, the reason for isolating them from our bacterial isolate was to see if more active molecules that could be used as bioreceptors could be obtained. Sometimes small change in proteins can give high efficiency. So this happens because of the adaptability of bacteria. One such protein we isolated is CAD-C. Interestingly, CAD-C protein showed novel metal binding sites, and CAD-A found to be an ATPase involved in metal detoxification. Complete gene regulatory unit, which is known as an operon, was isolated. Its operon structure and proposed regulatory mechanisms are shown here. So I'm very sorry because the animation doesn't work with this PowerPoint version. Okay, so I will move on. So this is the biosensor construct. So here the reporter gene expression serves as a measurement of the availability of a specific contaminant in the environment. So CAD-C GFP transcriptional fusion will be used as shown here for bacterial biosensor construction. So today, if I move on to a current topic, use of biosensors in the current context, these days we are striving to be safe from being infected with coronavirus or COVID-19, which is highly infectious disease caused by the very recently identified coronavirus, namely severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2. Presently, two types of viral tests are approved by the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, molecular test and antigen test. In molecular test, the viral genetic material is detected using polymerase chain reaction. Currently, quantitative real-time polymerase chain reaction is being used widely to detect COVID-19 from different specimens. But it is time consuming, labor intensive, and may not be rapidly deployed in remote or resource limiting settings. This might lead to hindrance in acquiring realistic data of infectivity and community spread of COVID 19 in the population. Antigen tests are done to detect the presence of antibodies in the blood that has been developed against coronavirus. This can be considered as a lab on a chip or a biosensor. So here on the right hand top, there is I have shown you all a biosensor used for the COVID-19 using this antigen antibody principle. Antibody is the analyte and the antibody is the analyte and the antigen is the bioreceptor here. Antibodies are produced by the immune system to identify and destroy harmful foreign substances such as bacteria and viruses. Positive corona antibody test most probably means that the person was infected by coronavirus at some point in the past. However, a positive result does not indicate that a person is currently having coronavirus infection. With the advancement of science today, different kinds of biosensors have been developed to test coronavirus COVID-19, such as CRISPR-Cas, paper-based bioassays, and the antigen-based silver gold nanoparticles, surface plasmon resonance. So today in general, biosensors have found an important place in society as they are aimed to improve the quality of life in diverse areas. There has been an outstanding improvement in the way scientists work and think across boundaries. Engineers and physical scientists now have a much better understanding of basic biological processes, while biochemists and molecular biologists have a greater awareness of the capabilities of different technologies. Though I am a molecular biologist, I am attached to the Department of Chemistry, University of Colombo. So my peers support always in finding solutions to our biological problems, and we can apply whatever we find with the help of chemistry in different applications. The alliance of experts of different disciplines from the onset of biosensing development project is a very attractive proposition that will certainly bring advanced and novel products to the market. Unfortunately, very few biosensors have achieved commercial success globally at the retail level. For this, improvement in the following areas are required. So those are miniaturization and microfabrication technologies, development of novel nanomaterial and nanostructural devices, use of novel biorecognition molecule where we are working on. But platform is open for you all to find out miniaturization and development of nanoscale components. I am here today because of the guidance of my loving parents and adorable teachers. So I consider that these people as iconic figures in my career journey. My undergraduate research supervisor, Emeritus Professor H.D. Gunawardana, who molded me to be a researcher, late Dr. Maya Gunasekara, who inspired me to pursue work in the field of biochemistry and molecular biology, Professor Sujata Hevage, who's here today in the audience. Thank you very much, madam, who guided me during my early career at Department of Chemistry, University of Colombo. Professor Nagai, Professor Vachi, my postgraduate supervisors. Professor Atsushi Ikai, with whom I worked as a postdoctoral fellow. My school teachers, late Mrs. V. Malagala, my grade 1 class teacher at Sri Mau Bandaranaike Vidyalaya, Colombo 7. Mrs. Rukmani Gururatna, my A-level class teacher at Vishaka Vidyalaya. And I would like to acknowledge the Department of Chemistry, University of Colombo, where I am attached, National Science Foundation and University of Colombo for providing financial assistance for our work. I am a teacher by profession, so I believe that I should not only disseminate knowledge, but should also be responsible for molding my students to be faithful citizens with wholesome qualities and wisdom. This is a part of a verse from Subhashita written by Alagiya Vanna Mukhavatituma. Gunanana belen yutuputumaya itagaru. The child endowed with virtue and wisdom is most blessed. This cannot be actually translated into English to give the exact meaning, but for me, it says it all. Finally, I am grateful to SLAS for providing a platform for disseminating research findings from different disciplines. My first scientific presentation on my undergraduate research work was presented at the SLAS annual sessions in 1995. Thank you very much to all of you, those who are here physically as well as those who joined virtually.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dilrukshi Vijayaratne. And thank you very much for collaborating with the organizations that we initiated work at SLAS. So I hope your team will continue that work with them. So this is a little appreciation from the SLAs for your valuable contribution made in this year as the president of section E2. The next presidential address is by Dr. Helene Munasinghe, the president of Section D of SLAS 2020. Dr. Munasinghe has obtained her PhD in 2015 from the University of Birmingham, UK, and also her MSc is obtained from the South Korea. She's a graduate from University of Colombo, molecular biology and biochemistry honors graduate. Currently, she is working at the University of Sri Jayewardenepura as a senior lecturer, and her research areas are molecular biology, focusing on food and drug safety and aging. So there are many achievements during her career. Dr. Munasinghe, the floor is open to you.
Thank you, Professor Janita. The General President of SLAS, Professor Janita Liyanage, the council members, my dear teachers and friends. Today I would like to do my presidential address on food safety and would like to discuss some of the research we have conducted in collaboration with the Nutrition Department of Medical Research Institute, Borelle. Science for Quality Life. The SLAS theme for 2020 reminds us of the importance of addressing issues related to improving quality of life rather than the mere extension of lifespan. Now, food safety should be ensured in handling, cooking, and in storage of food. The current COVID-19 situation imposes new threats to food safety. During this pandemic period, it is challenging to maintain without interruption routine activities such as inspection of food business operations, certifying exports, control of imported foods, monitoring and surveillance of the safety of the food supply chain, sampling and analyzing of food, managing food incidents, providing advice on food safety and food regulations for the food industry, and communication on food safety issues with the public. 1 in 10 people falls ill after eating contaminated food each year worldwide, according to WHO. Contamination could be either microbial, such as due to prions, viruses, bacteria, fungi, or it could be due to chemical contamination. Now, this contamination could be intentional or unintentional. Unintentional chemical contamination or food contamination could be due to, can occur with awareness or without awareness. Now, this is one study we have conducted in collaboration with the Nutrition Department of Medical Research Institute, Borelle, and we have published that in Journal of Food Quality in year 2019. And the title was Quality Assessment of Selected Dairy Products in Sri Lankan Market. And myself, Ms. Pramisha Pereira and Professor Marapana authored this paper. Sorry, this was actually done at University of Sri Jayewardenepura, not in collaboration with the Medical Research Institute. And we have, in this study, we have tested several samples, milk samples. We tested 4 milk brands, full cream milk powder brands. 2 of them were locally produced and 2 were imported varieties. And Then we also tested 3 pasteurized milk brands, and those were compared with raw cow's milk. And these are the parameters we have tested in this study. We tested the fat content, protein content, ash, carbohydrate, moisture, water percentage, total solids, titratable acidity, pH, specific gravity, arsenic content, and total coliform count. Now, in this study, for per serving of milk, we found the highest protein content in raw cow's milk compared to full cream milk powder and pasteurized milk. And average fat and ash content was significantly lower in full cream milk powder compared to pasteurized and raw cow's milk. And amount of carbohydrates was not significantly different between the 3 types of milk tested. And there was no arsenic in any of the tested samples. All the tested pasteurized milk samples and 1 full cream milk powder brand was contaminated with coliform. And unfortunately, 2 pasteurized milk brands exceeded the limit given in SLS guidelines. This could be categorized as probably unintentional contamination. And it clearly shows the unhygienic conditions prevailing in these production processes. Unintentional food contamination could also occur in our households, where we have better control. Since this happens mainly due to unawareness, today I would like to mainly focus on that aspect which would raise awareness. First, I would like to talk about food coloring or food dyes that we add to our food. Now, permitted food coloring or food dyes are used when preparing desserts, confectioneries or cakes. Because they are called permitted food coloring, people get a false impression that they are safe to use in food preparation in any amount required to get the desired color. Now, in permitted food coloring, sunset yellow, it's a permitted food coloring, can cause chromosomal aberrations which could lead to diseases such as cancer. A variety of food coloring such as tartrazine, that is E102, quinoline yellow E104, sunset yellow FCF E110, carmosine E122, Ponzius 4R E124 and Allura red E129 were found to increase hyperactivity in children with attention deficit hyperactive disorder or ADHD. Now, this E value is a number assigned for the food coloring permitted in European countries. Permitted food colorings are also recommended only at a concentration less than 100 parts per million alone or in combination. Do we have safer alternatives? Cochineal, beta-carotene, paprika, turmeric and anthocyanin, which are extracted either from insects or plants, are better alternatives. And we have also done a study. This study actually we have done in collaboration with the Medical Research Institute, and that was published in Journal of Food Quality in year 2019 on identification of synthetic food colors in selected confectioneries and beverages in Jaffna district, Sri Lanka. And it was authored by my student Ms. Dilrukshi, myself, Ms. Buddhika and Dr. PGSMD Silva. According to the Food Act 2011, Sri Lanka, only 9 synthetic food colors are permitted and the color concentration cannot exceed 100 ppm as a single component or in combination. And the study findings of that study were, now we have tested 110 samples, including these samples were collected from Jaffna district, and they included bundi, sweets, murukku, nice papadam, birds, laddu, and there are several of those as given in this figure. And in that study we found that 100% beverages and 85% confectioneries contain permitted synthetic food colors. Out of all, 7% of the confectioneries did not contain any synthetic food color, which is good. And 8% of the confectioneries contain non-permitted colors. which do not comply with any of the permitted synthetic food colors, which is quite alarming. And this figure shows the distribution of food colors in confectioneries and beverages as a percentage, and tartrazine E102 was the most used synthetic food color in both confectioneries and beverages. That accounted 41%. And this shows label violation of beverages collected in Jaffna district as a percentage. And this label violation is sometimes they have mentioned the wrong dye rather than what is actually being used. Now 60% of the beverages violated the label requirement without including proper color ingredients. Some confectioneries contained unidentified colors including a textile dye. Can we make a difference by educating the public? I have observed a group of GCE ordinary level students from Colombo district making informed decisions of refusing colored sweets. That shows that if we make the public aware of the adverse effects, they would refuse these, and that would make the producers limit the addition of coloring to their food products. And now I would like to move on to another food additive, monosodium glutamate. Now this was that by educating the public that you would be able to reduce the use of these additives in food industry is shown by monosodium glutamate. Now this was apparent in the addition of monosodium glutamate or MSG to food. Media created public awareness about the adverse effects of MSG or Ajinomoto to food, and now most of the food outlets either do not use MSG or say they do not use it. Some popular food products which had MSG are now sold with the label MSG free. And we have also done a study. This was done at University of Sri Jayawardenepura, and one of my students, Ms. Sabriya, and myself authored the paper, and it was published in Vidyodaya Journal of Science. And the study was a study of the effects of exercise and food additive monosodium glutamate on lifespan using Caenorhabditis elegans as the model organism. Now in that study we found that MSG exerts a significant reduction in C. elegans lifespan, and the gene DAF2, that's an insulin pathway receptor gene, which is mutated in CB1370 strain, has an impact on this negative effect caused by MSG to the lifespan. Since C. elegans shares 80% homology to human genetically, there is a possibility to have a similar effect of MSG on human lifespan. An expert committee appointed by WHO and FAD, that is United States Food and Drug Administration, on food additives evaluated the safety of MSG or monosodium glutamate. In their report in the year 2000, they concluded that there is no evidence to link any long-term adverse health effect with consumption of MSG in the general public. This conclusion was made due to extremely high doses of MSG required to cause neuronal damages and high rate of metabolism of MSG by the liver when administered orally. However, parenteral administration of MSG caused neural lesions in rodents and rabbits within hours of administration. This was also observed in a single study done with voluntary ingestion of 1 gram per 1 kilogram body weight of MSG. There are contradictory pieces of evidence on placental transfer of MSG and its involvement in migraine headaches. And there is hardly any study showing any beneficial effect of MSG. And another food additive is salt. With the Department of Nutrition of Medical Research Institute, we conducted a study on the amount of salt present in dry fish samples as well. And consumption of excess salt could cause several non-communicable diseases, and the recommended daily limit depends on the age. For example, between 1 to 3 years, it should be less than 2 grams. between 4 to 6 years, less than 3 grams, between 7 to 10 years, less than 5 grams, and above 11 years, it should be less than 6 grams. And kidneys of infants below 1 year are not fully developed, and excess salt could be toxic. If they are breastfed, mother's milk provides enough salt to the infant, and special attention should be paid if they share family food, according to National Health Service UK 2020. And sugar is another ingredient which we add to our food, which could lead to several non-communicable diseases. Sugar could be an addictive, and gradual decrease in sugar consumption would help to reduce sugar intake without getting sugar cravings. An adult should limit daily sugar intake to 30 grams, which is around 7 teaspoons. A child between 7 years to 10 years should take only about 24 grams, that is around 6 teaspoons. And for a child between 4 to 6 years should limit it to 19 grams, which is around 5 teaspoons. Now this includes sugar added to tea as well as sugar consumed through other food items such as sweetmeats and beverages. However, the control of sugar in milk, vegetables and fresh fruits is not necessary. Lipids and oils. Lipids and oils are essential for healthy living, but an excess tends to deposit in tissues and cause obesity, which leads to several non-communicable diseases. Lipids could be either saturated or unsaturated, and we should avoid saturated lipids. Saturated fats are commonly found in meat and dairy products. Fish oil is rich in essential fatty acids such as omega-3 fatty acids, but bioaccumulation of environmental toxins poses a risk on fish consumption. These essential fatty acids are important for a healthy life and cannot be synthesized by the body and should be obtained via food. Unsaturated fatty acids could be in the cis form or trans form, and trans fatty acids are not good for health. Trans fatty acids are mainly found in hydrogenated food products such as margarine, and in some developed countries, these hydrogenated food products are not sold in supermarkets. By increasing consumer awareness on these would help developing countries like Sri Lanka also to remove such products from the market. According to the American Cancer Society Guidelines for Diet and Physical Activity for Cancer Prevention 2020, consumption of processed and red meat increase the risk of cancer. And another protein source would be mushrooms. In addition to fish, another alternative protein source would be mushrooms. Sri Lanka has a very rich biodiversity, and we have a large number of wild edible mushroom species. Due to the presence of toxic mushrooms in the wild, only people with indigenous knowledge on edible varieties can collect them from the wild and consume. Therefore, there is a necessity for the commercialization of wild edible mushroom varieties. Only a very few mushroom varieties are available in the Sri Lankan market, such as abalone and American oyster. To fill this gap, we are in the process of optimizing culture conditions of several wild edible mushroom species. One of my MPhil students is involved in that project. There are several foreign mushroom varieties which are already in the foreign consumer market but are not cultivated in Sri Lanka. We are also in the process of identifying their suitability in introducing them into the local market. These are some of the research that we have done. Here we have several different novel growth media were tested for the cultivation productivity of some commercially available mushroom species. These are all edible varieties. Mushroom bags with the growth medium are now available for purchase in some supermarkets. It would be fun to grow them at home, which provides a rich source of protein and variety to our diet. But attention should be paid to the possibility of developing allergies and asthma, as some people could be allergic to mushroom spores. Although not commonly consumed in Sri Lanka, seaweeds are another good source of protein. Though they are called seaweeds, they are not weeds at all. In countries such as South Korea and Japan, they are a main constituent of any meal. They are not only a good source of protein but are a rich source of minerals. Many such edible seaweeds or macroalgae grow in our coastal line. There are several macroalgae such as some species of ulva, caulopa and sargassum which are edible and are commonly found in our coastal line. In Jaffna, they grow Capophycus alvarezi for the export market. Actually, in Sri Lanka, they used to export seaweeds a lot, and then people started adulterating it. And after the war period, the export market collapsed, and now it's time to initiate that again. In Sri Lanka, seaweeds are limited to luxury hotels, but it could be introduced to the local market. I actually did my master's degree in Jeju National University in South Korea, and there these seaweeds are a main constituent of their food. And it comes in soups, in all sorts of different products. Harvesting of seaweeds from the wild is not advisable as it can exhaust natural resources and may not be able to provide enough supply for the demand if people are made aware of the nutritional value and the different types of food which can be made using seaweeds. Therefore, cultivation should be encouraged. We are researching to develop in vitro cultivation methods for some edible seaweed varieties found in the Hikkadua area. Seaweeds are not only important as a food but also provides hydrocolloids which have high commercial values such as agar, alginate, agarose, carrageenan, etc. For example, in Jaffna district, I told you that they are growing some seaweeds and they exported 1 kilogram per about dried seaweed for 60 rupees. But when we purchase agar, I think it goes above 30,000 rupees per kilo. They are important in the food industry, pharmaceutical industry, textile industry and paint industry. For example, addition of alginates to ice cream prevents ice crystal formation and gives a smooth texture. Most of the creams have seaweed extracts as a base. If you take any creams that we apply, the base is actually seaweeds extracts. Extraction of these hydrocolloids does not require sophisticated equipment or methods. Furthermore, vegetative cultivation of seaweeds requires fastening seaweeds onto floating ropes or nets in the open sea or just spread on the water in ponds with seawater. A taxonomical guide for Sri Lankan macroalgae is given in ABC Taxa, a product of Belgian National Focal Point to the Global Taxonomy Initiative done by the University of Ruhuna with Ghent University, Belgium. As an island nation surrounded by the sea, it is a pity that we do not realize the value of this neglected resource. These are some of the seaweeds we collected from Hikkadua coastal line. And next I would like to talk a bit about aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are mainly produced by fungi such as Aspergillus flavus which can cause cancer. Sometimes people may think consumption of parts of food after removing the area with fungal growth is fine. But it is important to understand that the fungal mycelium would grow within the food and we see only the region with fungal spores as rotten. Therefore, it is not advisable to consume any part of food if any fungal contamination is detected or if the food is expired. Animals such as mice have several types of glutathione transferase enzymes which help them to detoxify such toxins, but we should not consume such food as we do not have such a variety of glutathione transferases as mice do. Therefore, just because an animal consumes a type of food does not mean that it is suitable for human consumption. Cooking utensils also should be considered in preparation of food for safety. It is not only the food that matters, but the utensils used for cooking also should be selected with caution. It is better to avoid the use of plastic containers due to presence of endocrine disruptors such as di-2-ethylhexyl phthalate or DEHP and its breakdown products in plastic which can cause sterility. If anything is added to food for the sour taste such as tomatoes, lime juice, vinegar, goroka, etc., that food should not be cooked in metal containers such as aluminum containers. Metals dissolve in acids, and cooking sour food in metal containers or serving them in metal containers can cause metal toxicity. Not only in food preparation at home, but when serving food in functions such as weddings and funerals, also should avoid metal containers and metal spoons when serving sour food such as fish, pickle, etc. Food contamination is a worldwide concern, and during COVID-19 pandemic, it is essential to identify possible routes of contamination and avoid them, as there is a risk of exceeding the capacity of healthcare systems due to pandemic situation, and food poisoning could be an added burden. I discuss mainly food contamination, which could be unintentional and could be due to lack of awareness. However, as I said before, it could also occur intentionally. During the past, we have heard of stories of intentional food poisoning, but they were at an individual level due to personal issues. But recently, concerns were raised against food poisoning targeting a race or religion. This is a novel aspect which requires testing of the validity of such concerns and take preventive measures. Is it a good idea to allow food products to be labeled based on religious or racial aspects, as it would provide a way to poison a particular group of people based on religion or race? Should we rethink of food labeling regulations? It is time to think. Thank you. And I would like to make this an opportunity to thank my parents, my mother-in-law, my husband and the two sons, and my teachers who helped me throughout this journey, and my colleagues who were there always to help me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Munasinghe. This is to appreciate your work done during this year as the president of Section D. Please. Now, and we'll start